The thing about fantasy is existing in this world is kind of the worst most of the time. It's exhausting, the hours are exploitative, no break, no pay, no union. Like, what's even the point? And it's really nice sometimes to read something that's like most of the way made up, because it helps me disconnect from whatever it is in my life that's been stressing me out. This month it's my health. Who knows what fun adventure is next in the docket if I ever figure this out, but fantasy is always there for me. And I have honestly been pretty behind on a lot of the buzzy big releases recently, so we're going to be reading a lot of them this week. That's the plan. And I am going to rate these books on 2 metrics. First of all is how good they are, what the quality is, my typical 1 to 5 stars. But then also I'm rating them on escapism. Like, how much did this book quiet the dark thoughts? How free did I feel, even if only temporarily, from the crushing grip of reality? And hopefully through both of these, you'll be able to find something that you want to read. Yay! Hello, welcome to the vlog. I hope you brought some water, perhaps a snack. The inspiration for starting this video is this book, One Dark Window, which is the first piece of literature in a couple of weeks that has held my attention at all. High praise, let me say, given what I've been cooking recently. And to say I am eating this up, to say that I am fine dining, I'm having a delicious meal, these would all be accurate descriptors of my time reading this book so far. And I don't know if it's just that this is the first like pure epic fantasy book that I've read in a while that's not just like urban fantasy, we're in New York or London, except there's magic there. Isn't that crazy? No, this has strange nouns. It takes place in an imaginary location. It has character names that are barely real. And it's been a while since I read a book like that. So this book might be getting a little bit of a buff for reminding me that I enjoy those kinds of stories, but so far it's been really good. The premise of this is you have this girl named Elspeth who lives in a kingdom that is persistently rankled by this mysterious disease, where once children get this disease, they end up developing magical powers. Except the catch is that magical powers in this world are degenerative. It's very equivalent exchange. Like, you can't just do the cool thing without having something equally bad happen to you in return. And because these kids, I presume, get magic that they can use, but they can't really completely control, they just kind of create chaos and degenerate at alarming rates. So the kingdom just gets ahead of it and outright executes anybody who's sick, which is not a great way to go, but it's just how things are done there. Also important to note that the only way that it's actually okay and ordained by the kingdom to do magic is if you're using one of the cards from what you can imagine as like a magical tarot deck. There are 12 different kinds. They all do different things and also have different consequences for anybody who practices them. And they're also, in a roundabout way, the source of the magical flu. And the king is currently trying to get all of these cards that have been lost across the kingdom so that way he can cure it and save everybody. How great. And Elspeth, our main character, she was able to avoid all of this. When she caught the flu as a kid, she was able to remain undetected. And 10 years later, she looks on the outside like she's never been sick. She's miraculously faced 0 consequences. She doesn't seem to have any magic. But of course, this is not the case because Elspeth has secretly been harboring this like evil seeming monster manifestation of one of the most powerful tarot cards inside of her brain. It speaks to her, it can give her powers if she's in danger, it has its own selfish interests that are not completely clear to us at this time, and Elspeth wants nothing to do with it. She's really just trying to vibe and blend in as best as she can until someone finds her out, and that person is Raven with a Y, who is the nephew of the current reigning king. He's the captain of the guard, and he's also a treasonous traitor who is also trying to collect all of the tarot cards before the king can finish his set. And it turns out that Elspeth, through this creature inside of her head, has some kind of unique ability that Raven and his team can use. So the story really takes off from there. I thought this was romantasy going in, but honestly the romance is really light so far. Like, it's much more straight up just a typical fantasy book, which I really like. It's not too complicated or difficult to follow. Like, you get these really good explanations of everything going on with the magic system and the lore of the world pretty early on that you can refer back to if you ever get lost. So I didn't spend very long confused. And I don't know, it's really hitting. There's nothing that's particularly unique or crazy about this story, but it's hitting. It's really good. I'm intrigued by the mysteries. I like the characters. I like the light banter that we're kind of starting to get, and I want to know what happens. I feel like my brain is absorbing this book like a sponge. I am going to try to read as much of this as I can tonight, but I have high hopes. It's really fun. But before we keep going, I just want to take a moment to talk about the sponsor for today's video, which is Skillshare. I am, probably to a fault, an extremely independent person, which means that when I'm doing things creatively, such as editing this video, I do not allow myself to not know how to do something. And while this trait has definitely led to me developing a lot of new skills, it also creates a massive amount of frustration because I don't know how to just give up on something difficult and find an easier way to do it. But recently, I've been trying to get ahead of it a little bit by picking up new Adobe Suite skills on Skillshare before I actually need them. Anybody who's worked with Adobe Suite programs before will tell you that they are both way easier than you probably think and also way more difficult. But the most challenging and beginner unfriendly by far that I use is Adobe After Effects, which you can use to do a lot of really neat things with image tracking and motion graphics that you can't really do anywhere else, but figuring out After Effects sucks. Like, the program is so opaque as to be essentially unusable unless you're learning from somebody who knows what they're doing. And because of that, I've been finding a lot of value from Jake Bartlett's classes on Skillshare, which are super beginner friendly and easy to follow and are making me feel like I might actually one day be able to incorporate cool graphics and animations into my videos, which would be super dope. But even if you aren't interested in the Adobe suite, Skillshare has classes on absolutely everything, from how to knit to how to design productive routines for yourself to how to format your resume. And if you are stubbornly self-sufficient like I am, I honestly can't imagine a better place to go if you want to better yourself both creatively and professionally. And if you are ever threatened by how many options there are, if you don't know where to start, they also have these neat curated learning paths that basically function as playlists of hand-picked classes on a variety of different topics. And the class system on Skillshare has also improved with new categories and smart recommendations that are tailored to your interests. So it's really easy to navigate through the wealth of information that exists on the platform and find something that really resonates for you. So if you're interested in picking up a new skill and doing like squats and lunges, except for your brain, you're in luck, because the first 500 people to click my link in the description will get their first month of Skillshare completely for free. So much can be learned in just 1 month. I strongly recommend it. Thank you to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. I really appreciate it. Let's get back to it. Okay, hello, it's the next day. One thing that's pretty neat about this book is it has these little card graphics at the front of every chapter that have poems from the big lore book of the world. And if you know me, you know that I am a slut for a good epigraph. So I'm living right now. I'm having a great time. But one thing I want to say with that is the monster inside of the protagonist's head speaks with her telepathically, and he'll often do so in the form of these poems that are really similar to the poems at the front of every chapter. And look, honestly, it really works in the context of the story. Like, when I'm immersed, when I'm reading, I'm like, speak in riddles, you monstrous monster. Tell her of the evils of the world, except do it in verse for some reason. Slay. But when I think about it, when I'm not actively reading, it is incredibly goofy. I can totally understand why the main character spent the last like 10 years of her life not taking him entirely seriously. He's a freak. Of course she's not afraid of him. If this man and Elspeth went to a fast food restaurant to get a burger and Elspeth was like, what side should I get? He's the kind of guy that would hit her with the salad can't sate a dark being so old. The wilt of the lettuce makes our blood dim and cold. You must procure fries. It is our fate foretold. But seriously, even though it's kind of goofy, in the context of the book, it does kind of cook. Like this one from early on. The hawthorn tree carries few seeds. Its branches are weary. It's lost all its leaves. Be wary the man who bargains and thieves. He'll offer your soul to get what he needs. I don't know, man. It's cheesy, but it's fun. It's rhythmic. I also just like him. He's kind of this wholesome but evil father figure curmudgeon type dude. I don't really know what his deal is, honestly, but his commentary about the things that are going on is always interesting to me. But with that said, I do feel like the main twists that are probably about to happen have been pretty obvious the entire time, but I'm not even mad about it, honestly. Like, I feel like I'm having a good enough time where I don't really care that I know the direction of the plot. As long as what happens is not worse and less cool than my expectations, I feel like we'll probably be okay. And also, who knows, I could still be surprised. We'll see. I'm gonna keep going. Okay, hello, it's the evening and I have officially finished this. We made it. I want to start off by saying that I feel like this book is marketed as a gothic fantasy, and I mean, it definitely has some darker components. It has castles, it has a girl who does some ugly things. It has a more detached and vibey kind of narration style where the main character is not insufferable, but she is a little bit more clinical than you might be used to reading books like this. But as somebody who really likes dark academia, like gothic vibe stories, this doesn't really feel that gothic. It mostly just kind of feels like a fantasy story, which is fine. I don't think that this book like had to be gothic, but I just feel like if you go in expecting that, you might be a little bit disappointed, because instead of that, this is what I feel like I want most fantasy romances to be. It's not reinventing the wheel. Like, it's almost exactly what I would imagine if you asked me to give you the vibe of a fantasy romance book and you had me captive in a padded room and you handed me a half-used box of crayons and a poster board. Like, I would come up with a story that has the same major beats as this story. But I don't really care in this instance, because I feel like this is a very good execution of everything that makes it kind of predictable. You have all of the essential components. You have the we are a group of rebels who are rebelling and doing a thing, plus the however will we connive and scheme and find all of the cards before the king, plus the does he hate me or is he just quiet and tortured under the weight of all of his morals and ambitions romance subplot going on at the same time. Like, nothing in here shocked me, but I did have a really good time. And it has a pretty distinct young adult flavor to it, but the writing is a lot better than some of the other romantasy / fantasy romance similar books that I've picked up because of TikTok. This was written by a woman who had an editor and was given feedback, and it shows. And yeah, it's a pretty simple story, but I think that there can be a lot of comfort in that. I mean, the Odyssey was written like 3,000 years ago at this point, and still most stories are in some capacity the Odyssey. And I'm not comping this to the Odyssey, let me be clear. They have very different vibes, but the point is, it's fine to read something that's familiar, that only keeps you on your toes because you let it keep you on your toes, because you're immersed and you're having a good time. I was correct in most of the predictions that I made throughout this book about what would happen, and that's okay. I still liked it. Honestly, I think the worst thing about it is that the man's name is Raven with a Y. Like that just doesn't sit well with me. You can name your characters anything. Like half of the names in this book are either trees or not completely real. You could have picked something that is not so obviously Wattpad core for your male lead. And to be clear, this book is not Wattpad core. And also I did like him. I did like Raven with a Y, so take that as you will. I don't know if I've said this out loud already or just thought it, but once again, this book is light on the romance. The back half for sure has more, but even then it's still pretty clearly a B plot, which I think I prefer for the most part in a book like this. This book does have a sequel. It's a duology, and it ends on a pretty compelling cliffhanger. And I'm not gonna go out and buy it right now because it's kind of late, but I do think that I'll read it this week for this video because I'm intrigued. I think the next book could actually surprise me because with this, I feel like we reached the end of what felt kind of telegraphed. But in terms of rating, I feel like this is a 4-star book for me, and I feel that pretty strongly because it's definitely good, but it's not going to change your life. I think it lacked some depth in both world building and also the relationships between characters that I hope will be kind of corrected in the next book. But if you want a more descriptive and vibey, kind of mysterious, classic fantasy romance, I think that you'll enjoy it. I definitely had a good time. But did it help me leave my body? Do I feel detached from the worldly problems in my life right now? Kind of. I mean, I really had a good time, especially in those last couple of hours today. I was locked in. I was in there. But earlier today, I honestly spent a pretty long time dwelling and yearning for what cannot be currently in my life right now. And dreading also. Dreading. There was a lot of dreading associated with an upcoming doctor's appointment. And obviously none of that is this book's fault, but it is the fantasy genre's responsibility to make me not do those things. So I think it's a 3 on escapism. It did its best. It did an average job. The second book I read for this video is Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Faeries. And this is about a professor named Emily, who, in pursuit of creating her titular encyclopedia, travels to study the mysterious and dangerous fairies of the North, alongside her equal parts charming and annoying colleague, who she is pretty sure is secretly a fairy himself. Okay, hello. I'm here to do my first, I guess, real update on Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Faeries. I started this yesterday, and I'm now on page 200, so like 2/3 of the way through the book. It's not that I haven't had things to say, it's just that I haven't wanted to be perceived. You know how it is. But I really like this so far. I was a little bit skeptical when I first started the book, just because it's definitely pretty overwritten. I mean, for good reason, because the main character is an academic. She's pretty detached. She has like a very clinical way of seeing her work and the world, and this is supposed to be her research journal, kind of. That's what the vibe of this book is. Lots of big words for the sake of big words, lots of frankly ridiculous turns of phrase, but like it works and it's a good time. It is not cozy. It definitely will try to convince you that it's cozy when you're reading about like the small town that Emily is traveling to where she's doing her research. You're like, oh boy, she's about to go and make some friends like at Stardew Valley and like restore her faith in humanity. But you find out pretty quickly that that's not really the vibe of this book. It's kind of giving fractured fairy tale a little bit, but it still maintains a lot of charm because it's quirky, because it's nerdy. And it's kind of late right now and I'm tired of being awake, so I will talk more specifically about this tomorrow. But I feel like more main characters should be allowed to be selfish bitches because, for example, there are some people that are in danger and Emily has to decide whether to go with the male main character to save them. And they're talking about it. And he's like, do you actually care about the society of these people, your Stardew Valley village? And in her internal monologue, she's like, yes, I felt something. I am no monster. But would I go after them for their sakes alone if there were no scientific discoveries to be had? No. No, I wouldn't. Honestly, slay. I think that's iconic. But yeah, I like it. Okay, I'm going to go pass the fuck out. See you tomorrow. Hey cuties. I have not read that much more since we last spoke, but I just wanted to check in and expand on some of the stuff I was saying yesterday because I just watched back the footage and I feel like I spent 20 minutes talking yesterday and said actually 0 complete thoughts. Also, I'm using the book as like a little mount for my camera, so I won't be holding it up, but just imagine it's here. I just want to touch on the main reason why I feel like this book was recommended to me, and that is the romance. So Emily, the main character, is on a mission, right? She's finishing her encyclopedia. She's such a bad bitch that she will travel to and explore the tundra in order to do so. And Wendell, the man, is another professor in her department at her university. Emily refers to him as her only friend, not because she likes him, but because he's the only person who will continuously talk to her and bug her, even though she is wildly antisocial in her department. And she absolutely thinks that he's annoying, but she also has some clear fondness for him and for his antics because he's a really chaotic guy. He kind of just does whatever he wants. He's silly. He's incredibly charming. Like everybody around him likes him with no effort really put forth by him. But he's also kind of a bump. Like, he has grad students that just follow him around and cater to his every whim in exchange for bylines on his papers. And he's very much not macho, like not used to getting dirty, not used to putting his own boots on the ground and doing things. So definitely not your average male lead. Like, he outright sucks a little bit, but from the jump, it's obvious that he is obsessed with Emily and has like a great amount of respect for her work and for her character, but not in a weird possessive way. And everything he does in this book, you can see pretty vividly through that lens. But Emily, again, in the plot of this book, she only keeps him around because she is like 99% sure that he is a fairy, and she is studying fairies, and it's extremely convenient probably when you're going where no academic has gone before to have an inside source. So she's kind of using him from the beginning. He's just happy to be here, and the romance in the book evolves from there as antics occur and weird things happen in the tundra because it's crazy up there. The book is definitely plot and fantasy forward, but in a different way than with One Dark Window, because the romance is a subplot, mostly because this book is kind of like a fantasy fairy buddy cop movie. Things are happening and they kind of matter, and you kind of care about the expanded side cast of characters, but it really just gives like quirky, kind of dark, slice of life sitcom energy. And the romance between them is slower burn in the background. Like, he's obviously obsessed with her, but it's taking a minute to cook, you know? And I adore that in books. Like, I hate it when they get together too early. I feel like it's all about the banter, it's all about the tension, and their dynamic is just really fun. Like, she is constantly over his nonsense, and he's just in the corner being indignant and wry and making snide remarks. But yeah, I like Emily. I like how much of a grumpy bitch she is. I like Wendell. I like how randomly and joyously violent he has become in this book for almost no reason, but it's iconic. Again, it's kind of giving Fractured Fairy Tale a bit in some of the scenes. And mostly I just like this book as something that you can kind of disappear into, kind of like that retro meme with Homer Simpson into the bush, you know what I'm talking about? That's what I feel this book is doing. It's just kind of like swirling itself around me like a blanket. So I'm gonna keep reading. The idea here is that I'll finish this today and report back and start the next book. Okay, I finished it. This is one of those books that honestly works really well for me, but I would struggle to recommend it in a broad sense because it's the kind of thing where if the writing style doesn't work for you, it really doesn't work for you. I said it a couple of days ago when I started, and I'll say it again. The book is objectively pretty overwritten. It's pretentious, and the pacing is also a bit weird. Like, the book has a pretty slow start, and then it starts to vacillate wildly from these slice of life Emily rambles about fairy lore and walks around in the cold sections to lots of action and adventure and uncozy violence that's happening at the same time. And I think that's going to feel jarring, maybe in general, but especially if you're not bought into the way that the story is being told. So take that as you will. I think that you'll be able to tell whether you'll like this book within maybe the first 30 to 40 pages, because even though the events of the story definitely pick up and lots of things start to happen, the tone is consistent through the entire book. But with all of that said, I was surprised by just how much I ate this up, honestly. I think that if I'd had the time to just sit down and absorb all of this in one sitting, I probably would have, but life got in the way, which was pretty rude. But if you want like lusciously dark, mercurial, almost Cruel Prince style fae who kidnap children for sport and do violence in creative ways, but you would also like a fun little folkloric romp through a magical world, I think that you'll find the intersection of those two things inside of this book. Once again though, the romance is definitely in the backseat. And also, I mean, Wendell is not your typical aspirational book boyfriend, okay? But he sucks in such a wildly entertaining way that I kind of just ended up walking ass backwards back into really liking him. So keep that in mind, temper your expectations, but yeah, the plot and the characters in this were really compelling to me. Also, Emily has friends. She doesn't think that she has friends, but she has friends. She has people that love her. And that realization coming from your classic grumpy, solitary loner, it's a trope that will always do it for me. So additional points for that. In terms of rating, I'm giving this book 4 stars. For a second, I was like, is this a 5 around the middle? But no, it's not. But it did still bang. I did have a jolly good time. And I'm glad that this is apparently a series because I will happily read more of these. In terms of escapism, I recognize that this is probably just my dark and twisted mind and my internal pretentiousness, but this was actually better for me than One Dark Window. It really did feel when I was reading this like I was swaddled in the most insufferably whimsical blanket that I had ever seen. Even when really wild and gruesome shit was happening, I still felt very comforted and immersed. So that's a 4 for escapism in my mind, and a strong performance for both books so far in this video. But the next book that I'm reading, maybe the last book, maybe not, it depends on how much life continues to obnoxiously get in the way, is Vicious by V.E. Schwab, because I really thought to myself, yeah, let's start another series right now, the 3rd in this video. That's what I need, you know, just another series to be in the middle of in perpetuity. But I don't know, okay, it's what my heart is saying to read, so it's what we will be reading. I am kind of a V.E. Schwab doubter, unfortunately. I have been for some time. I actually think that this is probably the last chance that I'll give one of her books before I decide that she's just not really for me, but I also don't know when to quit, so who's to really say? But yeah, it's actually not because I think that her books are bad. I don't. It's just I typically find them to be very underwhelming. I have read both the original Shades of Magic trilogy and then also Addie LaRue, and in both cases I thought that the ideas were fantastic. I always find the blurbs of her books to be fire. I also, for the most part, really like her writing style. I think that that splits the difference well between being both compulsively readable and also lyrical and interesting. But for the most part, I feel like all of her books have just been historic fumbles that take these really interesting premises and weigh them down with a lack of world building, questions that are never really answered all the way, and especially with characters that feel either trite or flat or otherwise completely uninteresting. And I just end up feeling by the time I get to the end like I'm grieving the thought of what the book could have been when I picked it up. And that sucks because everybody loves her. Like, she's a very beloved author, especially online, and it really makes me feel like a doomer for missing out on the magic that everybody else seems to feel inside of her books. So that's why I'm trying again, one last time with this book, which I've definitely heard the most positive things about out of her catalog. I feel like I get this book recommended to me all of the time whenever I bring up this mini feud that I have with V.E. Schwab, and the premise, once again, seems gas. It's about these two guys named Victor and Eli, who are college roommates, they're best friends, and then they end up cracking the code on how to give themselves superpowers, which I think leads to them both becoming supervillains, although very different kinds of supervillains. And they end up having this very complicated relationship when I think they're pit up against each other later in life. And that sounds fantastic to me as somebody who's really into Invincible, The Boys, all of those like really violent and aggro subversions of classic Marvel superhero movies. So we'll see how it goes, but I'm cautiously optimistic. I mean, when I'm kind of absorbing this, I'm already on part 2. Everybody in this book is a menace. The main character has no morals, possibly no positive personality traits, but is maybe doing the right thing anyways, regardless. It's iconic. Like, me when the convicted murderer lets the runaway that he's been parenting for like 2 days keep the dog. I do kind of love them. I'm intrigued to see where this goes. I feel like it has a lot of potential. Also, I cannot be the only person wondering if Victor and Eli are just going to simply kiss at any point. Like, being this obsessed with your college roommate is not very straight behavior, and I just feel like a lot of the problems in this book really could have been avoided if they'd realized that. But I'm gonna keep going. I'm having a great time. Good morning. I'm reading again. One thing that's really interesting about this book is it's told in split timelines, right? So I'm bouncing around between Victor and Eli getting superpowers 10 years ago, Victor in the present day just after escaping prison, and then also a bunch of vignettes in between. And sometimes I think the decision to tell a story this way can give a book a pretty disjointed vibe, but that's not the case with this one. At least for me, it's been really easy to follow, and I also like the kind of non-linear patchwork of backstories that you're getting for the characters as you're moving through this very action-packed modern day. And with that, the writing style in this is pretty similar to the Shades of Magic trilogy, but I like the people in this a lot more. Victor, in particular, is objectively a pretty bad dude. Like, he's clearly meant to be an unlikable narrator, he's got some empathy problems, he doesn't really feel things very good like other people seem to, but he doesn't pretend to be anything that he's not. And I like characters like that, especially in cases like this, where he's kind of accidentally doing the right thing, not really because it's right, but just because it aligns with his interests. Like, yeah, he's a morally bankrupt psychopath, but he's my morally bankrupt psychopath. You know what I'm saying? Also, my initial synopsis of this book was not exactly true, because it's not that they're both supervillains, really, at least not the way that you're thinking. I mean, superpowers are not even really widely believed in this world. Where their villainy actually comes from is Victor goes to prison for 10 years, yes, because of his own actions, but also definitely because Eli betrays him. And with Victor in jail, Eli has been out doing bad things in the world ever since. With that said, Eli definitely doesn't think that he's doing bad things. There's this really interesting layer of religious fanaticism to his motivations that I didn't expect going into this story, but it definitely makes sense, because in a world where superpowers exist in this way, you'd better believe that there would be some kind of fundamentalist movement of some variety that deems those people to be aberrations against God. Like, it's not a stretch whatsoever, which is why it's so compelling to read about. And it's really interesting to juxtapose Eli's motivations alongside Victor's feelings, which themselves are not very good. Again, Victor kind of sucks, but they end up seeming a lot more just and nice in comparison with everything that Eli is doing. And their relationship in general, like, in some ways it honestly reminds me of Death Note. The book doesn't have nearly as much focus on the scheming and the kind of cat and mouse detective work that Death Note does, but the complicated L/Light relationship that the characters have with each other, seeing each other as their only equals, and also the constant grappling with their powers and their morality in this crazy situation, it has a certain je ne sais quoi that reminds me a little bit of Death Note. And yeah, I'm intrigued to see where it goes. I'm getting pretty close at this point to the end, so hopefully I will be able to finish it today. Hi, I just want to return back to a couple of lines from earlier in this book. It wasn't just that Eli stole Angie from Victor. That was bad enough. But somehow Angie had stolen Eli from him too. The more interesting Eli, anyway. Not the one with perfect teeth and an easy laugh, but the one beneath that was glittering and sharp like broken glass. It was in those jagged pieces that Victor saw something he recognized. Something dangerous and hungry. Victor watched the way that Eli's eyes took on a sheen when he spoke of EOs, and the change in his tone, lower, more urgent, matched with the nervously shifting muscles in his face as he tried to hide his excitement. The zeal peeked through at the corners of his mouth, the fascination around his eyes, the energy in his jaw. Victor watched his friend, mesmerized by the transformation. He himself could mimic most emotions and pass them off as his, but mimicking only went so far, and he knew he could never match this fervor. He didn't even try. Instead, he kept calm, listened, his eyes attentive and reverent so that Eli wouldn't be discouraged, wouldn't retreat. The last thing Victor wanted him to do was retreat. It had taken nearly 2 years of friendship to crack through the charming candy shell and find the thing that Victor had always known lurked within. And now, slouching around a coffee table stacked with low-res screenshots of sites run by grown men in their parents' basements, it was as if Elliot Cardale had found God. Even better, as if he had found God and wanted to keep it a secret, but couldn't. It shone through his skin like light. It's fruity, I'm sorry. And then this from much later. I mean, said Victor, you could pick any name. Why pick Ever? Why not? No, said Victor, waving his drink. No, Eli, you don't do anything like that. Like what? Without thinking. You had to have a reason. How do you know? Because I know you. I see you. Eli drew his fingers through a ring of water on the table. I don't want to be forgotten. He said it so softly he worried Victor wouldn't hear, not over the chatter of the bar, but he clamped his hand down on Eli's shoulder. For a moment, he looked so serious, but then he let go and slumped back in his seat. Tell you what, said Victor. You remember me, and I'll remember you, and that way we won't be forgotten. That's shit logic, Vic. It's perfect. Like, just kiss, dude. If Eli didn't have so much obvious religious trauma, I swear to God, these fuckers could have cured cancer. But instead, they're just vague tweeting each other through police databases and smacking each other around in abandoned buildings. Because apparently, the greatest obstacle known to man is not how to literally give yourself superpowers. It is their mutual refusal to acknowledge their own rabid bisexuality. All this, and for what? And for what? Yeah. I'm gonna keep going. Okay, hello. I really liked this. I think that I'm going to end up giving it a 4.5, which is a lot higher than I expected to give a book by this author. So for those of you in my comments who have been telling me to give their books another go, thank you. I appreciate it because this one was definitely better. And I think that the main reason that this works so well for me is that there's something really cinematic about the way that this book is written, where you can so easily see the characters facing off with each other. You can feel the rain that may or may not actually exist in the scene, but it definitely exists in the vibes, and it's bouncing off of the pavement very dramatically. You can smell the iron in the air when they're fighting. Like, there are so many moments in this book that just feel big. And I think that if you enjoy any of The Boys, Death Note, X-Men, etc., you'll probably enjoy this too. I will say that it lacks a little bit of depth, especially in terms of the potential I think that Eli had as an antagonist. Like, his motivations are super fascinating, but he's not given quite enough room to breathe and develop, I feel, especially compared to Victor. And he ended up feeling a little bit flat in all of that negative space. I mean, I still liked him as a character, but I feel like I liked him mostly because of things that I made up in my head about how his brain works and how he sees the world. I don't know if you guys do that, but like, we don't know very much about this man. The book hasn't told me enough about his history or the way that he ticks for me to find him as compelling as I do, and yet here I am. But there's a sequel because this is a duology, of course, and I hope that we see him a little bit more fleshed out in that because I want Eli morally gray. Okay, I want his morality to be as interesting as Victor. And I think that we could get there, but in this book, he was just pretty obviously evil and difficult to redeem. I also think that in a roundabout way, and this is something that the book doesn't really talk about at all specifically, but in terms of what I got from it thematically, I think that this ended up being a really interesting portrait about how trauma can change your worldview and change your relationships, both with other people and also with yourself. Because of the nature of how superpowers are created and how these people feel afterwards, like that's where a lot of the problems in this book come about. And I think that most of the internal conflicts are based in trauma responses in a way that nobody in the book seems to discuss whatsoever, but that was extremely obvious to me while I was reading. And you see enough differences in how that can turn out for people, especially I think with Sydney, that it puts into question why any of this had to happen at all. Like, what might have happened if we were all just a little bit more compassionate towards each other? What might have happened if all of the people in this cast simply had competent therapists? And obviously it's more complicated than that, but I do feel like there was a really interesting discussion on trauma that was happening under the surface of this book. So that added a fun dimension. And overall, it was just a fun book. It wasn't perfect. Like, there were definitely some things I wish had been explored a little bit more in depth. I didn't quite have that 5-star feeling that I get when something is really, really special, but I liked this a lot more than I thought that I would. And I can forgive some of the mistakes that this book made with depth or with pacing, just because I feel like it was such a neat and entertaining story. In terms of escapism, I actually ate this up. Like, every spare moment that I've had in the last couple of days, I've spent reading this book. Disclaimer, disclaimer, I'm also a pretentious sack of shit. Like, I love a university setting. I love an evil man. man that you end up rooting for anyways. So in some ways, I feel like this was handmade for exactly my personality, but I'm giving this a 5, I think, in terms of how easily I forgot the world around me when I was reading it. That's a lived experience that I can't lie to you about, and this was a great time. But with that, I know that I said that I would read 2 Twisted Crowns in this vlog, but I think that if I have to film this for another 3 days, not only will I self-destruct, but also it will really be lying when I say in the title of this video that I did all of this in a week. I'm already cutting it kind of close in terms of plausible deniability there, but believe me when I say that every book that I read in this video, I fully intend on continuing these series because I had great luck with these selections. All of them were at least 4 stars, highly enjoyable. If you had told me when I finished One Dark Window that it would be my least favorite book probably for this video, I would have laughed at you, but here we are. So that's it. I hope that you guys are taking care of yourselves. I am trying to do that as best as I possibly can. For those of you who don't follow me on Instagram, where I overshare like once a week, I'm dealing with some mystery chronic health problems right now, seeing some doctors, getting a bunch of tests, just having a grand old time, really. But it's probably nothing like that insane, so don't worry too much. I'm still here, I'm still kicking, and just try to drink enough water with me, eat enough food, go outside and touch grass at least once a day so that way you don't wither away in darkness, and go talk to somebody if you start to feel like your body is breaking down. Would not recommend waiting until it gets overwhelming. And yeah, I appreciate you guys, seriously, thank you for being here, and thank you for your patience during this time. I feel like there's always something going on, but it's okay. One day 2024 will be over and we will be free, and we're gonna be okay, okay? Okay. I don't have anything else to say. Bye.